I am always unhappy to see right-wingers fighting. I think our opponents are so bad, so crazy, so vicious in the way they fight that we should be united and not fight each other. Personally, certainly. We should debate ideas, no question about it, but we should stay off each other personally. So I want to say at the top of this that I thought Sohrab Ahmari did the wrong thing. His article was in First Things, and he called it Against David Frenchism. And that's not the way we should be having debates. It really is not. It really matters. It really matters because and then later he said, oh, well, I was just going after his ideas. Fine, but there are ideas that David maintains that you can attack in general, even quoting him, even saying he's one of the people you disagree with, without labeling it David Frenchism, which immediately makes it personal. And the fight, of course, on Twitter immediately became very stupid and very personal. And he included things like he said at one point, this is in this article in First Things. He says, it isn't easy to critique the persona of someone as nice as French. Then again, it is in part that earnest and insistently polite quality of his that I find unsuitable to the depth of the present crisis facing religious conservatives, which is why I recently quipped on Twitter that there is no polite David Frenchian third way around the cultural civil war. And I totally disagree with this. I've known plenty of nice people that you can't get around with that you can't dig up with a backhoe. And it's part of this kind of fake, I'm not accusing Ahmari of this, but I think that idea is part of this fake macho stuff that has grown up on the right. I hate this stuff. I hate this talk about alpha males and so forth. Alpha male is a category of ape. I have known many a wimpy little guy who can stand like an absolute pillar of stone when he is assaulted and attacked for his opinions and his beliefs. And I've known many tough, guys that I wouldn't want to go toe to toe with in an alley who collapse the minute there's social pressure against them, and yet they seem like alpha males if you're judging in ape terms. Integrity, rock solid integrity, comes in all kinds of shapes, all kinds of forms, and all kinds of people, and you can be incredibly nice and polite and incredibly immovable when it comes to matters of principle. And human life is far, far too complicated to be judged on ape terms. And I just hate that faux macho stuff that grows up on the right about this. But they do have philosophical differences and differences of position. I have said before, and I said it when he was here on the show, I feel French's horror at Donald Trump's character is overblown, and I feel that it is actually a problem. I think it's a problem for right-wingers to have guys, he's hard, he's a devoted evangelical Christian. French is absolutely horrified that evangelical Christians are supporting a guy who raw dogs porn stars and is cheating on his wife and does all this. And he said, one of the reasons I invited him on the show was he said that alone would cause me never to vote for him. My problem with this is that let me show you the opposition. The candidates, the Democrat candidates were in California talking to the California Democratic Convention, one of them being, of course, John Hickenlooper, who was the former governor of Colorado. And here's the welcome he got from the California Democrats as he warned them against socialism.
If we want to beat Donald Trump and achieve big progressive goals, socialism is not the answer. I was reelected in a purple state in 2014, one of the worst years for Democrats in a quarter century. We shouldn't try to achieve universal coverage by removing private insurance from over 150 million Americans. We should not try to tackle climate change by guaranteeing every American a government job. Hold on. As the Democratic Party, we have to create a vision for this country. I want to give Americans a reason to look forward to tomorrow.
He's being booed for opposing socialism. When that is the opponent, when that is your opponent, you do, arguing about whether Trump slept with somebody, to me, is jejune. It's ridiculous. That is not the important thing. You want to dislike his character, you want to condemn the things he did, fine. But the fact is, if you had to choose as a matter of character between John McCain and Donald Trump, I would choose John McCain. But John McCain was a lousy senator, and Trump has so far been a pretty good president. I think a very good president in some ways, and I think that that's what we hired them to do. Some people are not nice people, and yet they do a good job, and this is what we hired him to do. He's not our daddy, he's not our pal. And the thing is, people always reference Hitler. If you don't know your history, Adolf Hitler was a man made completely out of straw that people used to beat each other's political opponents with. But there was also another Adolf Hitler that people don't know, who was an actual real human being and a psychopath who led a country into world war and nearly wiped out an entire race of people, and was actually one of the great villains in history. And people, when he rose up to fight the communists, there were a lot of people who said, well, he is a vulgarian and he is awful, but we've got to use him to fight the communists. And people compare that to Donald Trump. The people who hated Hitler as a vulgarian hated him for the wrong reason. He wrote a book saying, I am a fascist. I believe in destroying your democracy. I believe in destroying Jewish people. I believe in starting a war. He wrote a book. He said he was going to do it, and then he did what he did. That was the reason you opposed Hitler. And Trump has done none of those things. He represents none of those things. Outside of left-wing media, none of that is in Trump's agenda. He's just a business guy who wants this country to work like a business in a competitive fashion. He has done a good job in that. And he's also a vulgarian. He is. There's no question about it. So their argument, so French is wrong about that. I mean, Amari is wrong to personalize this. French is wrong in his, he's too delicate about Trump's faults. So Amari supports Trump, saying, with a kind of animal instinct, Trump understood what was missing from mainstream Frenchian conservatism. His instinct has been to shift the cultural and political mix ever so slightly away from autonomy, above all, toward order, continuity, and social cohesion. He believes that the political community, and not just the church, family, and individual, has its own legitimate scope of action. He believes it can help protect the citizen from transnational forces beyond his control. And French's answer to that was, Donald Trump wouldn't even fully grasp what that paragraph means, much less recognize it as a governing philosophy. He's a man of prodigious personal appetites, a man who proudly hangs a Playboy cover on the wall of his office, a man who marries and then marries again and again, yet still feels compelled to find porn stars to bed. In his essay, Amari condemns the man who claims autonomy above all else. He is, without knowing it, condemning Trump. So this, to me, is a kind of a minor part of this argument. One person on Twitter condemned French for condemning Trump's infidelities because French enjoys Game of Thrones and there are naked women in Game of Thrones. That's how absurd the debate goes. I personally condemn David French for looking a lot like me and yet occasionally disagreeing with me, which I find just incredibly confusing. How am I supposed to know what I think if a guy who looks just like me disagrees with me? But here's where I think both of them are wrong, and the important stuff they're wrong about. French is right about this. If we're not fighting for American freedom, if we're not fighting for a pluralistic society where the person we disagree with has just as much right to speak as we do, we are not fighting for anything. If government action, look, every one of the founders said our Constitution only works for religious people. If we are no longer religious, I've said this before, we've already lost. You cannot chain people to their freedom. You cannot force them to believe in God, not our God, not the Christian God. You cannot force them to believe in that God. And so we really are fighting for, plurality. We're fighting for everybody to have the ability to speak. And Amari is wrong. If you stop fighting for that, you're not fighting for anything. You are no longer fighting for the political fruit of Christian belief. Look, the moral consensus has collapsed. In the 50s, we had more or less a moral consensus, what was right, what the good life looked like. There were people who dissented and they were allowed to dissent, but we had a moral consensus. When that consensus collapses, right, you have to rebuild it. French is right. You have to rebuild it through the culture because you cannot force it on people without losing the purpose of what you're doing. And the reason is we're the good guys. We fight for different things than the bad guys. The bad guys are not saying they're in favor of abortion. They're saying you, in your state, cannot pass a law against abortion. We're not fighting to outlaw abortion. We are fighting for the right to outlaw abortion in our state. It is a very, very different thing. I'm not fighting for conservative news, but for fair news. I don't want there to be conservative news. I'm happy for the press to go after Donald Trump if for 8 years they also went after Obama. They didn't. They don't. it's unfair. That's not the press I want. But it's a different fight. They're fighting to control the news. I'm fighting to have the news be fair. Those are two different things. And French is right. Culture is the only answer. You cannot force people to be free. You cannot force people to love their freedom. But French is wrong in that he does not understand that force has already come into play. Force has already been used. And Amari's right about this. They have used the principle of autonomy to chase God out of the public square. The federal government has no right to come into a local courthouse and say they can't put the 10 Commandments there. The ACLU should not be able to frighten people with lawsuits. They should be able to frighten people with lawsuits, but the people should know that those lawsuits will fail when they say you've got to take prayer out of school. That's absurd. Look, the federal government's purpose is to preserve individual autonomy, but local governments and community governments have more sway because people can move and people live in those governments and have more direct control over those governments. That was the point. The closer the government is to you, the more power it can have. So a community can say, yeah, we're not going to allow cross-dressers to use the opposite bathrooms. And Barack Obama should have no say in what they do in that community. That was the purpose of our Constitution. And French is wrong to not understand how violently and completely the left has taken over the culture in those terms by stacking the court with people who say, well, yeah, you had an idea and that idea might become a product and you might sell that product into another state. So your idea is regulated by interstate trade. You know, what's his name? Bret Stephens, who is Amari's mentor but disagrees with him, right? He wrote a piece kind of attacking Amari for all this. But Bret Stephens was one of the guys who pointed out that we who operate under the First Amendment are protected a lot of times from the regulatory tyranny and the social tyranny of the left. And the left has used every means at its disposal to shut us up. I don't want to shut them up. But I do want to shuck off those chains that they have put on, the mental chains of political correctness, the chains of blacklisting that have completely cleared Hollywood of conservatives and the universities of conservatives. David French has fought heroic battles to allow Christians, heroic legal battles, to allow Christians to continue to speak in universities. But what good are those battles when you can't get hired as a Christian at a university? You can't get hired as a conservative as a university. Donald Trump became necessary because the left has not played fair. That is the point. They have not played fair. And the answer to that is not, oh, now we'll not play fair. The answer to that is to fight them back with force, with political force, not physical force, but with political force in the places where they have not been fair. It's not fair. It's not American that the EPA can decide that your swimming pool is a public waterway, then arrest you for swimming in it, then try you, then put you in prison without any reference to due process or any other court outside of the EPA. Those are the regulations that need to be destroyed with force. Those are the things that need to be destroyed with force. Blacklisting, keeping the federal government telling people whether they can have the 10 Commandments in their schools. All of these things have to be absolutely crushed, and they can only be crushed by somebody like Donald Trump, who has the raw boorishness to not be deterred by being called racist every single day. Show me the other Republican politician who can stand up to that kind of abuse all the time, and I will vote for him. You know, I mean, just show me the guy who will stand up and spit in their eye the way Trump does, and I won't support Trump anymore. But if it takes supporting a guy like Trump to stop them from the absolutely brutal oppression of free speech, the throwing you off Twitter, I mean, where are the suits against Twitter? Hopefully the DOJ is looking at Google, but all of these places where we have been banned from the public square, where our ideas have been chased out by federal power instead of letting local governments decide, instead of letting schools decide how they will be run. Those are the places where we need more ferocity to fight back. But what we're not fighting for is we're not fighting for the right to chase them out. I think that Amari is utterly wrong about that. He was accused of wanting a theocracy, and people said, oh, you're just saying that because he was an Iranian, now converted to Catholicism. But no, I mean, that is where he was going. He's going eventually, if you use the government to coerce the public square, to recognize the federal government to coerce the public square, to the highest good, eventually you are going to have a theocracy. If you live in San Francisco and you want transvestites reading to your kids in the library, That's San Francisco. That's fine. But if you live in another place and in Nashville and you don't want that, the left should not be able to come there and sue you and force you to have your community live up to San Francisco standards. That's why I so oppose what Hollywood is doing on this abortion debate, not because they don't have the right to their opinion. They live in California. Let them live in California. Let Georgians live in Georgia.